Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Yeah, it's just me and some colts here in the studio. Rich Eben's off today. He's at the farm and he's preparing for winter. Much of same thing that we do here. We've been preparing for winter here in Missouri, baling hay for the last several days. And that's what we do because we want to make sure the cows have plenty to eat. They don't starve and freeze to death in the winter. So this time of the year, we do our best to get the hay cut, raked, baled, and then stacked in the barn. So Rich is well. He's working hard, and he'll be back with us when he's finished with most of his winter preparations. I'm sure he's going to come back before he's completely done. But Rich has a farm in Montana, and he does a lot of things the hard way. I mean, he's got some equipment, but he has to put his back into it. So he'll be back. And I want to let you know, I got a call last night from Sonny Skidmore, and many of you have been asking how Sonny's doing. Well, you know that she was in a car accident, and as a result of a series of events, she had her legs amputated. Both of them. And it was a life-altering event. She's about 90 years old. And she called me from the nursing home, and she has gotten her prosthesis. She is walking with them, but they won't let her walk alone, so she has to have someone there in case she falls, and she has not fallen yet. Her spirits are outstanding. She's a real lady. And so we talked at length a couple times yesterday in the evening. And I asked her how it's going, and I asked her about the communist Chinese virus that they've inflicted on the world. And she said it's been there. People have been infected. And she said that there are people who worked for a company that packaged food, dry food. And I'll give you the details when she comes on the air with us next week. And she'll probably be with us for a couple hours next week. And so the management was infected, top management, and died. And they shut the company down, and they disinfected the company, and they reopened. But so if you're wondering, does anybody know anybody? Do any of the USA Prepares instructors know anybody who has been infected with the communist Chinese virus that's been taking down the planet? There's a USA Prepares instructor who does. And I've been unable to talk with Sonny Skidmore of KLID AM 1340 because her phone number was changed. And I didn't know how to get in touch with her or where she was. So I've been just grinning from ear to ear with her outcome so far. She's doing really, really well. Her outlook is extraordinary, and she's going to be on the air with us next week. And let's see. This Friday, we're going to be doing a special broadcast at the request of David in Illinois. We're going to be talking about rifles, pistols, shotguns, and revolvers. We're going to give you our take on what we like and why. We're going to talk about, if time permits, ammunition. And originally it was going to be a 1-hour broadcast. And I talked to David off air. He said he could do 2. And Kyle heard me mention that David could do 2. And Kyle called right after the broadcast yesterday, and he's going to do 2. Now, George in New Hampshire wants to join in. George, you're certainly welcome to call in and be with us. We can probably make all that happen. I'll do I'll be the MC, and I will push the buttons and try to make all that happen. And we probably ought to do it again and again, because I think it's a topic that many people are interested in, because Kyle and David and George have a lot of experience. We've all been shooting for years. In my case, since the 60s. So that would be, close to 60 years. And the other members of the faculty probably darn close to that as well. So we bring a lot of experience. And not everybody shoots every day. But we've handled lots of different rifles, pistols, shotguns, and revolvers. And we can tell you what we like and so forth. So that's going to be Friday. And, Rich is off today, as I mentioned. And since he mentioned cars, and since Rich mentioned cars, we're finding it more difficult to get some of the additional auto parts that we'd like to have here at the shop. And one of the things that we are doing is we are bringing in supplies that we think are going to be even harder to get once the selection is made. And that's in 47 days. 47 days, and many people, including yours truly, believe that times are going to get way worse after the selection, because half of the country will be unhappy. Or if they're happy, the other half is going to be unhappy. And it's a contest between 2 guys that neither one can seem to tell the truth. And the Democrat guy, Jumpin' Joe the plagiarist, Biden, stole a friend's wife. Yeah, look it up. Yeah, he stole a guy's wife. So Jill is Jumpin' Joe the plagiarist's second wife. And at first he borrowed her and he stole her. Look that up. That's absolutely true. When we order automobile parts, we're finding it lately even more difficult than we found it before. It wasn't all that pleasant before because we couldn't get what we wanted just when we wanted it or when we needed it. And what would happen is customers would come in and they would have a problem. And so that problem would require a part. Let's say it's a control arm for the front suspension, or let's say it is a steering rack, or let's say it's ball joints or tie rod ends or universal joints or shock absorbers or serpentine belts, alternator, water pump, fan clutch, blower motors, blower motor control systems, switches, whatever it was getting harder and harder to get. Well, lately, the newest wrinkle is wheel weights. Now, what are we talking about? So you go and buy tires. And when you do, the good old-fashioned method that we use here at the farm and for our son's customers, for his business, we balance wheels the good old-fashioned way. We spin up the wheels and we use a dynamic balancing machine. It's made by John Bean. It's also known as Snap-on, and we bought it for hardly anything, $400. $400 for a wheel balancing machine. And I converted it because it was a 3-phase system. It came from either Walmart or Sam's Club. So it's a top-of-the-line machine. It's an older machine, but it was 3-phase power, which is what you find in industrial areas. Well, we don't have 3-phase power here. We have split-phase, also known as single-phase. So I converted this split-phase system to run on single-phase, and it works fine. So we have a little box that converts the electricity, and you can do that. So if you find that you can get a great deal on some piece of gear, like a lathe or a compressor or something like that runs on 3-phase, and you say, shoot, we don't have 3-phase. 3-phase is 4 wires. So if you look at the power poles and you see 4 wires, that's 3-phase. If you see only 3 wires or 2 wires, that's single phase or split phase. So it's called two things, single phase and split phase. So if you have 2 or 3 wires, it is the non-industrial electricity. And that's what we have here at the farm, and all the other farmers have it too. So I bought this box. It's probably $55. And I used it, wired it in, and converted split phase to 3 phase, and this wheel balancer uses plain old split phase electricity. I can run the wheel balancer on our solar system. All right, so here's what happens. When we balance tires and wheel assemblies, we mount the new tire on a wheel, and we check it for being true. We spin it up and we watch it. We see if it wobbles. We see if the tire's out of round, meaning it has high spots or low spots. And if the tire passes that test, the next thing we do is we balance it. And the tire machine that we have will tell us exactly how much weight to put and where. So weights will go on the inside of the rim. Now the rim is where the tire contacts the wheel. That's the rim. Some people call the wheel a rim. A wheel and a rim are two different things. The wheel is the complete assembly with the centerpiece and the rim. A rim is just the part that contacts the tire. The tire bead. Anyway, it'll tell us, our machine will tell us exactly where the weight goes. How many ounces or fractions of an ounce go at exactly which location. So we will physically hammer on these wheel weights, and they're typically made with lead. Hammer them on, and then spin up the wheel again and see if it actually did in fact balance the wheel and tire assembly. If it didn't, we'll rebalance it until we get it right. And we balance within, let's say less than 1/10 of an ounce. And we are very precise about that. And when we balance wheels, when you put them on the car, you'll think you have a new car. It rides so much better because most people don't do it that way. And here's what they do. And there's a reason why I'm telling you this long, drawn-out story. The wheel weights are getting really hard to get, and we can't get them. At least within a few days. Now it looks like it's going to be out a week, if we can get them at all. So we're kind of concerned about that because we always put new wheel weights on when we balance a wheel. That way they don't fly off. Used weights, they work for a little while and they tend to fly off. Then the wheels become unbalanced. So we use new wheel weights. Well, when we balance tires, they're done right, and we double check them, and then we put them on the car. The new method of balancing wheels that we don't do is that you add beads, little round beads, thousands of them, and you put a pre-packaged packet of beads, kind of like those soap pods. They're packaged like that. And you look up on a chart how big the tire is, like 255, 60, 16. And you look up on this chart and it says 1 packet, 2 packets, 3 packets of these beads. And you just throw them in. You throw them in to the tire, and then you mount, as you're mounting the tire on the wheel. And then as the tire rotates, these little packages break and these beads roll around. And I'll tell you why we don't do it when we come back. So it's just me today. And if you'd like to call, if you've got some preparedness tips, we're going to stay on preparedness today. So if you'd like to call, we'll pay for the call, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Preparedness tips only. If you've got a better way of doing it than I've mentioned, I'd love to hear it. I'm sure our class would as well, but nothing outside of preparedness, please. So I mentioned that because lead, it's my opinion that because lead is in short supply, because the previous administration, the Barry Soetoro cabal, had closed down the lead mines in the United States. So the only lead that's available, for the most part, the lead that's available for car batteries and bullets, projectiles, and weights for balancing, etc., is recycled lead, because Barry and his bandits have shut down lead production in the United States for environmental reasons, so they say. I think it was dumb. But anyway, so lead weights are getting harder to get, and there are substitutes for lead. But the problem is that lead is really dense. And because it's dense, it has a lot of weight for the given area that it occupies. It's perfect for lots of things. Perfect for bullets. It works really well for lead acid batteries. It works really well for lead wheel balancing weights, etc. Well, what happens now is that when you buy tires, tire shops have become really lazy. And they would prefer not to spend the, 5 to 10 minutes that it takes us to balance a wheel and get it right. They would rather take these little packages of ceramic beads and throw them into the tire wheel assembly just before the bead sets. You hear that pop when the bead finally sets when you inflate the tire. Well, they throw these beads in there, the packages break on purpose, and these beads roll around, thousands of these little beads. They're a little smaller than a BB. They're white, and they're ceramic, and they roll around. And the idea behind that is they take an average amount, and they say, okay, well, this size tire is out of balance by this many ounces, so we'll throw this many beads into the carcass of the tire. And as the tire rotates, going down the road, when it hits 55 miles an hour, these beads will kind of settle down, and they will adhere to the opposite side of the heavy part of the tire. So if the heavy part of the tire is at 12 o'clock, these beads will settle around 6 o'clock and balance out the tire, as long as it's going over 55 miles an hour. So if you slow down, the beads fall out of place. Centrifugal force holds them in place. Okay? So these things are always rolling around. They're banging into each other, and they only work at 55 miles an hour or more. So when you stop, all the beads fall to the bottom, the 6 o'clock position. So when you're parked, all the beads fall to the bottom of the tire. Once you start rolling, the beads roll around inside the tire, and they find the spot where they can balance the tire. But they're always moving. They're always rolling against each other, and they cause friction. And they abrade the inside of the tire, and they cause dust. And that dust is rubber dust. So when you go to inflate your tire, let's say you look at it and you go, geez, I think it's a little low. So let's add some air. You put the tire chuck on there and you inflate it, and you can hear the air rushing in. And then when you think you have enough air in it, you pull the tire chuck off and it goes, psh. Well, that sound is air rushing out. Now, the air that rushes out is the dusty air that has the rubber in it. And what it does is it clogs the tire valve. So now the tire valve doesn't seat properly and it leaks, which is why you saw the tire looked a little low. So you put more air in it again, and when you take the tire valve, or you take the tire chuck off, it leaks again out the tire valve stem. So it's a problem that continues. So what's the answer? Well, when you get those tires, they'll put in a new valve stem, one with an air filter on the inside, to prevent the rubber dust from clogging the tire valve, the Schrader valve. It's called Schrader valve. SCH, Schrader valve. So the reason all this has happened is because people don't know how to balance tires, and lead's getting harder to get. And so now we're riding around with tires that are really not balanced. This bead system of balancing is lousy. The tires are never really balanced properly. And they're not balanced at all speeds, where the good old-fashioned way, the way we do it here, the way it used to be done, works perfectly. We'll be right back. It's been widely reported that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on September 18th, 2020. But other reports say that she died 18 months before that. And that the recent death was of her body double. And that her body double was made by the same outfit that made the body double for Lawrence Zeiger, the man who used the stage name as Larry King. And they say that because they specialize, this company that makes them specializes in fast turnaround. And it's been reported that you can tell that they were body doubles because the body doubles have the same smile, the same intelligent look, the same posture, and that they use the same accelerant in their noses. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not change her name when she married her husband. Y'all know that? It's absolutely true that she did not change her name because her husband, his name was Martin D. Ginsburg. So they had the same last name. That's absolutely true. And they're not the only ones who, marry their spouse that has the same family name. And maybe Gwyneth and I can talk about the royal marriages and how royalty seems to be inclined to marry cousins. And they're not the only ones. Let's see, there are other people who have married their cousins. Here's some famous people like Rudy Giuliani, for example, the former mayor of New York City, part of the Trump administration. He married his first cousin. Well, the daughter of his father's first cousin, making her his second cousin once removed. Edgar Allan Poe married his first cousin. H.G. Wells married his first cousin. Saddam Hussein, well, he had a lot of wives, but his first wife was his first cousin. Charles Darwin, the guy who penned on the Origin of Species, he married his first cousin. Albert Einstein, his second wife, and he were first cousins on his mother's side. Jerry Lee Lewis, the rock and roll guy, he married a cousin. He got in the game early. She was only 13 years old. Kevin Bacon, he is distantly related to his spouse. I think they're ninth cousins once removed. Jesse James, he married a cousin, a first cousin. So, and by the way, speaking of Jesse James, there's a terrific series, as Peter Falk Columbo would say. Terrific. Well, I was telling Kyle about this on the phone yesterday, and these are little vignettes, and the runtime is, I don't know, maybe close to an hour. And this was a television series from the 1950s, I believe 1954 and 1955. So almost as old as I am, like over 60 years old. And this was in the early days of television. I mean, not everybody had a television in 1950, that's for sure. And those who did had black and white televisions. Well, this was filmed in black and white, this series. It's called Stories of the Century. There are 3 volumes, 1, 2, and 3. And there are 12 episodes on each of these DVDs. And it's called Stories of the Century, Matt Clark, M-A-T-T, last name Clark, Railroad Detective. So what they've done is they've inserted this railroad detective, this fictional character, into actual historical events, like he was the crime solver for the railroad. And some of the characters that are in this are portrayed historically accurately. And they are some of the hoodlums, the bandits, the cattle rustlers, the hooligans of the Wild West, where our family lives, like Missouri and Kansas and other states, Oklahoma. So these outlaws were all over the Wild West. And they had names like Black Bart, Tom Horn, Jack Slade, the Apache Kid, Cattle Kate, Sam Bass, Blackjack Ketchum, Doc Holliday, Frank and Jesse James, John Wesley Hardin, Clay Allison, the Dalton Gang. So there's 36 of these episodes, and I paid around $12 for it on eBay, shipped. 3 DVDs. You can probably find it. Now, is it going to be life-saving? No. But it's interesting to learn about the 1800s. And the century that this is set in is the 1800s. Our farm, the abstract for our farm dates back to 1844. We have the original paperwork from the James Buchanan Land Grant, where land was given to people who would settle it. So land was given, and then ultimately was sold and sold and sold and sold over and over and over again. Finally, we got it, and we paid for it. But, once it was stolen by the federal government from the Indians, it was stolen from the Indians, given away, and then sold and resold and resold. And we were the last owner so far of this particular farm. And I find this fascinating because this is the area where some of these things happen, generally the same area. I mean, not right on our farm per se, but generally the area. And you might find this interesting, and your children, as you homeschool them, you might find it interesting to share these videos because they're interesting, they're exciting, they're fun to watch. And it was, a railroad detective solving the crime. And the crimes had to do with cattle rustling in many ways. Swindles, cattle rustling, taking advantage of, unsuspecting people. Had to do with sheriffs, corruption. It's really, I think you'll find it quite fascinating and educational. If it weren't educational, I wouldn't recommend it. But it is. So that's the story about Stories of the Century, the television series. And there are 36 episodes. If you're fortunate, you'll be able to find it for about $12, $13 or so. Next thing, I'm talking about my book. I didn't say that yet, but I'm talking about my book. And that's kind of a loose term because it's an unfinished, unpublished, unorganized, not available for sale series of my notes. And I don't know if I'll ever publish it. At the moment, I don't have any intention to do so. And if you've noticed, I've stepped back, for quite some time now. I have not updated the website. Actually, I took it down. And it's because of those parasites who, like to attack and attack and attack. And it just, what? When people do that kind of thing, I'm not interested in helping them. And as a result, so the website is, it's there, but you can't get to it. I've put it on hiatus. And I don't update as to who's going to be on the radio with us. I don't do any of that. And I actually appreciate what these parasites have done because they freed up some of my time. Just as those people who decided to unfriend me. I appreciate what they've done because now I don't answer their calls because they don't call anymore. I don't have to help them out of jams. And if you're as fortunate as I am, you'll lose some of your former friends too. And it'll be less work for you. Literally. I'm not exaggerating. I have more time to work on the farm because I'm not helping other people as much as I used to. Next item from the book is a Splice in fuel filter. And I suggest that you consider this. You can go to eBay, that's where we get ours, and they have these 1/4-inch fuel filters. And we buy them for all of our gasoline-powered equipment. Now, they come in different sizes, so you need to figure out what size you need. And what you do is you cut the fuel line between the carburetor and the gas tank. Literally make sure fuel's not going to run out all over your hands and hot engine and, start a fire. But, if you drain the fuel out of the tank or you have a fuel shutoff valve and you can do it safely, what we do is we cut the fuel line. And we have a container, like a tuna fish style can. We've saved those for years. We don't eat tuna fish. We haven't eaten tuna fish for over 10 years. because of Fukushima and the radiation in the ocean. But we have some cans that we've saved, and I'll put a tuna fish type can under the hose where I cut it to catch any drips of fuel. I do it on a cold engine. And I wear those latex gloves. Cut the fuel line in the right spot, and I insert in the fuel line a fuel filter. And I use 2 hose clamps. And they are typically 5/16 size, 5/1/6 inches. And they have a worm type gear, and you screw that in and tighten the hose around the hose clamp, around the fuel filter. And there's a direction. The fuel filters are directional. So it'll show an arrow. That means that's the way the fuel flows. Flows out of the gas tank toward the carburetor. And it works really well. So all that those little bits of grit that come out of the fuel tank, a little bit of water, a couple drops here and there, if you have it in your fuel tank, gets stopped by the fuel filter. It saves a lot of problems. So what we do, when we buy them, we'll go to eBay and we'll type in the following words, like 1/4, as in quarter of an inch, fuel filter, comma, lot, L-O-T, which means we don't want to buy one. We want to buy a bunch of them. And typically you can get 10 of them for somewhere around $1 a piece, shipped. So that's like 10 for $10 or $1 a piece. And then you have to get the hose clamps. And we like the stainless steel ones the best. Now, what's happened is the Chi-Coms have decided that they can make a metal that looks just like stainless steel until you feel it. But, if you look at a picture of it, it looks just like stainless steel. And they're lousy. They rust. They fail. So what we do is we only buy the stainless steel ones. There's a good brand that we like. It's the same brand that's been around since I was selling auto parts behind the counter. It's called Ideal. I-D-E-A-L. They make top-of-the-line, world-class, best you can get, made in USA hose clamps. They cost 3 times as much. But they're still relatively inexpensive. So I think you'll find what we find. If you do this, you won't have anywhere near the problems with your gasoline-powered equipment, lawnmowers, rototillers, etc. We'll be right back. Yeah, so it's just me today. And so 47 days until the selection. And do you believe it'll be peaceful? Do you really? Do you think that we'll return to the good old days? When you can buy, flour and spaghetti and paper towels and go on a road trip with your family, maybe even go so far as to have friends over for dinner. Do you think that's possible? Or do you think more violence will ensue? Are you preparing to get what you need because you think it's going to be in shorter supply? Well, I suggest that you consider that being the case, because I believe that just about everything is going to be in shorter supply. As I believe that prices will continue to increase. And I've mentioned previously over the last several months that prices are going up dramatically. The quality vintage items that I used to buy cost twice as much as they did when they were brand new 40 years ago. Now, you used to be able to get them relatively reasonably priced, but, a month ago or so. But the price has doubled since then. So prices of things like quality battery chargers have gone way, way, way up. And I suggest as you see the colder, that you get a battery charger for your vehicle. Since we're all not driving so much, you want to keep that battery topped off, and you're going to want to top it off about once a week. So the minimum size battery charger I think you should consider would be 6 amperes. One that automatically tapers off as the battery gets further and further charged. Good size would be 10 amperes, 10 amp, or 6 at the minimum. Now that would be for one that will actually charge the battery. So if you had a a 60 ampere hour battery, and you had a 6 ampere hour charger, it would take 10 hours to charge the battery, all things being perfect. Actually, it would take longer than that in reality. So that's why you don't want a little tiny one. But you do want a little tiny one to, leave it on for several days. That would be called a trickle charger. That'd be 1 ampere or less. So if you have like a camper trailer that has a battery or two, you're going to want to hook up that battery charger to keep that battery topped off, because as it gets colder and the battery discharges naturally, a lead acid battery will just discharge all by itself if it's not connected to anything in about a month. And in that 1 month's time, that battery will freeze at 32 degrees. And when it does, the plates will buckle, the lead plates will buckle, and the battery will be destroyed. And there's no fixing it, because it'll be physically broken internally. So the way you can prevent all that from happening is keep the battery charged. But when you charge it, you want to look at the cells and see if they are at the right height with the electrolyte. And lots of batteries have these battery caps. Sometimes there are 3 caps per strip. There's 2 strips for a 12-volt battery. 12-volt battery has 6 cells, 6 places to put distilled water, and that's the only thing that you put in a lead-acid battery. Distilled water, not tap water, not spring water, not Perrier. The only thing you put in is distilled water, or you'll ruin the battery. Okay? So before you charge it, you check the electrolyte level, and go to the internet and you'll see how to do it. What I do is I wear safety goggles, long sleeve shirt, gloves, latex gloves, and I do it very, very carefully, because the acid, the electrolyte in the battery is sulfuric acid, and it can blind you if it gets in your eyes. It can cause all kinds of problems and burn your skin. So I do it where there's water. I have water ready. So if I splash any on me, I rinse it off immediately. Baking soda is the neutralizer for acid. It's the inexpensive neutralizer. So have baking soda ready. Have plenty of water ready. Make sure you can, if you get it on your face, around those goggles, make sure you wear goggles. Don't do it without goggles. Be very, very careful. Now, I'm not telling you how to do it. You can look that up yourself. This is really dangerous. And you don't want to breathe the sulfuric acid fumes. It can damage your lungs. So you want to do it outside. But have plenty of water ready. Do not skip that step. Water to rinse with. And then what I use to top off the batteries is I use one of those ketchup squeeze bottles that you see at you used to see at restaurants, right? They would refill them, put them on the table, and you'd squeeze the ketchup onto your French fries or hamburger or whatever you happen to be eating. I have one of those, and I marked it with the letters distilled water, the words distilled water. It's the only thing that goes in there. And I put the cap on it. That's all that's used for. So you only want to put distilled water in it, and look up how much to put in. There's plenty of videos. And that'll save your battery. And how much is that? About $130. And batteries are getting harder to get. We'll be right back. I'll continue with the book. I'll talk about making hamburgers when we come back, how to do it, how we do it. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Just me today. And a couple Colts. Actually 3. And class, as you remember on USA Prepares, we talked about the myriad of things that the GDP would do as they riot. I agonized about mentioning this, and I've been thinking about it for quite some time. I really didn't want to talk about it. But it happened yesterday in New York City. So the reason I'm telling you this is I think you should keep this in your mind if you travel. And think about what this might do to the supply chain. It's pretty serious. Now, of course, I am not advocating this. But the GDP has decided that it'd be fun to derail a subway train in New York City. And they did. This guy did. He literally derailed a subway train. And when it got off its rails, as it was moving, it crashed into some pillars, damaged the train, damaged hundreds of feet of track, and people got stranded. The subway rails got short-circuited. It tripped the breaker, the circuit breaker. It was a mess. So I have a feeling that the GDP might continue to do this and escalate it, especially after the selection in 47 days. If you watch that television series that I mentioned, Stories of the Century, Matt Clark, Railroad Detective, they had the law back then in the 1800s. And when someone rustled cattle, Matt Clark, the detective, would bring him to the sheriff, and the law would take over. Sometimes the sheriffs weren't able to contain the cattle rustlers, the criminals of the highest order back then. They got out again. So because of that, the villagers decided that sometimes they didn't trust the legal system. And they took the law into their own hands. They hung people. Stealing horses and stealing cows, that was a capital crime. And so cattle rustlers were hung, either by the law or by the villagers, if they got caught. People were sick of having, their hard work stolen from them. Well, as we go down this road, I really didn't want to mention it, but it's already out, so don't blame me. As we go down this road, spiraling to the demise of our country, I really expect things to get worse. And my job, I believe, is to prepare you so you survive this mess. These people are crazy. Derailing trains, really? People get hurt. People get killed. People die because they don't get their medicine when the supply chain gets broken. The sum of all individual stupidity and greed is taking us down. It's unacceptable. And in that light, I don't think that people are going to wait for the legal system. I think they're going to take matters in their own hands, just as they did in this Matt Clark Railroad Detective series called Stories of the Century. That's what happened. People were hung for high crimes because the people, that would be with a capital T and a capital P, the people didn't trust the system. And that's kind of like where we are today, right? I'm not advocating any of this. I'm just saying it's plain as day in my mind that this is the natural outcome of things. I mentioned many years ago that we were missing some cows. Some of our cows were gone. Our cows are very well trained, kind of almost like dogs. They know my voice. They know our son's voice. They know Mrs. Finelli's voice. They know our voices. They know the sound of our vehicles. They know our four-wheeler sounds different from other four-wheelers. They know our Jeep sounds different from other vehicles. They know our diesel truck sounds different. And when they hear our vehicles, they moo and they think we're coming to, give them a big hug and some biscuits. Which is what happens. Well, our cows have different kinds of ear tags compared to everybody else's. We'll call it we don't brand them. Some people brand their cows. I think it's inhumane. But some people do. We put tags in their ears, earrings, but they're like the size of a 3x5 index card almost. A little smaller. And they have numbers. And they're a strange color. Nobody uses this color around here that we use. We get them from outside the area. So that ours are different from everybody else's. Most people use white or red or orange. We don't. And our cows were missing. Some of them. Looked to me like our fence was cut. And the cows were on another guy's farm. Like a couple miles away. We found out where they were. And those were the days when I called the sheriff. Because I didn't want to get in a gunfight. And there was another guy who wanted to keep our cows. He did not want to return them to me. And it was the sheriff who convinced this other farmer, convinced his farmer's wife that the best thing to do would be to give us our cows back. And how did I prove they were our cows? Because they were in the back of the back of the back of the back 40 on this guy's farm. You couldn't even see him. Couldn't see him from the road. You couldn't even see him from off the road. He had them hidden. He wanted our cows. He was stealing our cows. What else would you call this? And so what I did was I said, come on. And the next thing you heard was a whole bunch of cows mooing. And I said it again, and they all came running to me. And the sheriff said, I guess they're your cows. Yeah, they are. So we got them home. But that's the kind of stuff that happened in the Wild West. And I live right in the Wild West in 2020. It's still the Wild West. That's why I say some of the things that I say. Now, what would you do? Let's say there were 6 cows. And let's say at the time they were worth $1,000 a piece. And someone stole your $6,000. Would you be upset? And let's say that person didn't want to give it back to you. Would you be upset? Let's say they just went into your bank account and stole $6,000. Would you be upset? Of course you would. And I think that's the way we're headed. More of this. Okay. Back to my book. Hamburgers. So here's what we do. And let me give you a way you can do it. So let's say you go to the store and they have ground beef. Whatever percentage you want. Like 85-15, 80-20, or better. Okay? And if you buy it in a larger 5-pound or so tub, tray, it'll cost less per pound. So what you can do is you can get some sandwich bags. You know, Ziploc food storage bags, sandwich size. And you can put about 1/4 pound, a clump, in the corner of the bag. And then use that, and you can take a spoon and figure out what about 1/4 pound is. Put it in the baggie, in the corner, and then use the baggie and press the baggie against the counter and flatten out that burger in the baggie. You don't have to flatten it out first and put it in the baggie. You can flatten it out right in the baggie. And it doesn't have to be perfectly round. Mine aren't. Now, Mrs. Finelli likes, and the boys, like them a little more round than I do. I'm not really concerned about that. What I am concerned about is thin. I want them like fast food thin. That's what I like. That's my preferred way of doing it. So mine are large in surface area and thin. They cook easier. They cook more thoroughly. And they fit on the rolls better than, ones that are more like a big meatball. I don't like those. So that's how we make hamburgers. And let's say we'll start with 20 pounds of meat at a time. And we'll build an assembly line. Everybody washes his or her hands. Okay. And one person will put the clumps in of the meat. Next person will flatten them out. Well, several people will flatten them out. And then when they're flat, we seal the air, as much air as we can, out of those Ziploc bags, sandwich bags. And then we put about 15 or 20 of them in a gallon size freezer bag. Then we mark it, when and what, and it goes in the freezer flat. That's what we do. Now, the trick to all this is to do it right away. So if you go to buy your meat, the day you buy it, that's the day you make the hamburgers. Not the next day or the next day or the next day or the day that just before the meat spoils. You do it the day that you buy it. And you don't have to pay full price. You can buy it on sale. And then how long do they last? I have no idea. They last a long time if you get the air out of the packages. And if you double bag them, meaning you take the Ziploc sandwich bags and you seal them inside a gallon Ziploc bag. So that's how we make hamburgers. And it works great. And well, you need a freezer to do that, right? So, next thing is, I mentioned a knife sharpener. You gotta have a knife sharpener. And I carry a knife with me all the time. Rule number 9. You always have a knife with you. And I mentioned that I like the Gerber brand Paraframe. It's about a 3 1/4 inch blade. That's the one I like. It locks in place. So I know that when I use it, it's not going to fold back and cut my fingers off. I really like that. And I sharpen it with the dual grit. Oh, I'd say it's about 2.5 inches by 6 or 7 inches long sharpening stone. Less than $10 on eBay. When we come back, I'm going to give you a quick thumbnail sketch of 12-volt battery chargers, and then I'm going to talk about keys, and I'm going to talk about Wasp Spray and coffee. So I just grabbed the sharpening stone that we use for sharpening our knives. Now, this would be carving knives and, pocket knives that we have, and skinning knives and so forth. We use an aluminum oxide dual grit sharpening stone. And I found them on eBay. And so it says 6-inch aluminum oxide sharpening stone, dual grit, and it's $7.99 shipped. So it's 6 inches by 2 inches. I don't know how long they last because I've had this thing for decades. They last a long time. And I use water when I sharpen a knife. So I keep it by the kitchen sink and I wet the stone. And I run warm water, dripping down onto the sharpening stone as I sharpen the knives. And I sharpen them in one direction. Some people use a circular motion. The way that works best for me is I sharpen them in one direction, and envision this. As you sharpen a knife, the way I do it is I try to make it so that the teeth, which would be the jagged edge of the knife, would be facing angles forward. So it's like a saw with saw teeth. If you looked at a microscope, under a microscope at the edge of the knife, it would be jagged. Okay. And what I do is I let those jagged edges face on an angle forward. So just like a sawtooth cuts in with a forward facing cut in the actual saw, that's what I do with the sharpening stone. And I use water as a lubricant. Some people use soap and water. I just use water. And it works fine. The stone lasts longer. The knife lasts longer. Everything lasts longer. And then for knives that I use for food, I absolutely wash them, and I get every bit of grit I can off them because I don't want to eat carbon steel and sharpening stone, aluminum oxide. I don't want to eat stainless steel, little tiny microscopic bits from the left on the blade. And you got to wonder, if you go to a restaurant, do you think they do that? Do you think they wash those sharpened knives before they use them, or they just sort of wash them? That's why I don't go to restaurants. Okay. Very quickly, the battery chargers, 12-volt automotive battery charger. My favorite brand is Xantrex, Xantrex. They're very expensive. Schumacher would be okay. Schumacher. That'd be okay. and I mentioned 6 to 10 amps is the right size for most applications. Expect to spend about $50 on eBay. Avoid the communist China manufactured ones, the no-name ones. I wouldn't trust them. So I know that the American ones have lasted a very, very long time. I have some that are 30, 40 years old. U.S. manufactured. They have names like Century, Century. They work pretty well too. That's an older brand. Okay. Cooking bacon. Very quickly, here's how I do it. I boil it first. I take the bacon and I put it in a pot of water. A couple quarts. And I add the water. I use filtered water and I boil the bacon. And the reason I do that is I dissolve the sodium nitrate and nitrite into the water. Water is a universal solvent. My dad was a chemistry teacher and a physics teacher as well as a principal. And he taught me back in the 60s that water is a universal solvent. You can dissolve a lot of things in water. So what I do and what he did was he dissolved the nitrites and the nitrates that are injected into bacon, dissolve that into the water, and you throw the water away. And then you cook the bacon. And I cook the bacon on a square cast iron bacon pan. The one that I bought was made by Lodge. I don't think Lodge is very good, but pretty much it's the only brand that's not imported. It's a U.S. manufactured brand. And you can buy a press that goes with it. So this thing's 8 inches square, and it has an 8-inch square press, cast iron. Put a little bit of oil in the pan, cook it slowly, takes forever, and I end up with well done, flat bacon without the nitrites and the nitrates. That's how I do it. I save the oil. I use it as a fire starter in the outdoor wood furnace. So what do you do with the water that you boiled the bacon in? Well, there's not a lot of fat in it. Okay, there's a little bit of fat, and it's water dissolved that has dissolved the sodium nitrite and nitrate. So what I do is I pour off the fat when I cook the bacon into a jar, and I save it as a fire starter. And you can actually save it and use it for cooking. Kathy's talked about that. Kathy's our domestic engineer. And the water I will take outside, and I'll walk it down the farm road. And we have a gravel farm road. And I will throw it so it spreads out onto the gravel farm road. Now, that sounds terrible, right? Why would I do that? Well, what else am I going to do with it? What'll happen is the water will volatilize, and it'll leave little tiny bits of fat and the nitrates in our driveway. Our driveway is rock. So animals aren't going to eat it. It's spread out so far they don't eat it. It dissolves in the rain and goes back to nature. I do not recommend that you pour it down the drain because it does contain a small amount of fat. And if you do, and you have a septic system, it will eventually damage your septic system. Enough oils and fats. So you don't pour those down your septic system. Now, people who have city properties, they don't think about like what happens when the GDP pours fat down the drain. It just goes down the drain and don't worry about it. Well, eventually it can clog the pipes, and it wreaks havoc on the municipal water system. So that's why since people have been cooking, they don't do that. Dial soap, you can buy it, and it's an okay soap. It's not great. It's just okay. Sam's has it. Now, if you get the yellow, I think they sell just the blue now. If you get the yellow, that leaves your white towels yellowish tan in the middle. So it's not you that's shedding on your towels. It's the dye in the Dial soap. So if you can, make that a second, third, or fourth choice and get something else instead. The blue is okay. It seems to come off the skin better. Do you have a blood pressure cuff? You might want to get one because it's getting harder to get doctor's appointments, right? You know that. So you might want to check your blood pressure as one of those indicators of general health, vital statistics. Let's say you have one and you get it and it has this USB power cord and a USB wall wart or wall switch mode power supply to drive that thing, and they fail. Those darn little power supplies fail. So what do? Well, it's easy. You probably have a PC flat screen, and a lot of them have a USB port in them, for hooking up speakers and so forth. Well, you can plug your blood pressure cuff monitor power cord into that USB port, and they usually have enough current capacity to drive the blood pressure cuff. So instead of just throwing out your blood pressure cuff because that darn little cheap Chi-Com power supply quit, use your computer monitor. Okay? That works. Okay. Next. Spare keys. So it used to be that if you had a house key in the good old days, let's say 15 years ago, you could get one for less than $1, without the electronics, right? They're just plain old keys, like a Quick Set brand or a Schlage brand, that style lock. You get a key for less than $1, maybe $1.50. You get it at the Chinese factory outlet. I suggest you do that. Get an extra key and put it someplace that you know where it is. Maybe outside the house in case you get locked out. Now, if you have to have a locksmith come and let you in your house, it'll cost a lot compared to, $1.50, $1.79 for the key today. If you have an automobile that has an electronic key, those buggers cost between $250 and $750. And it's way less expensive to get one when you have the key than after you've lost the key. Okay? So you can go to a locksmith, and if you've got one of those electronic keys, you can call them first and say, hey, I've got this brand car, and here's the make and the model. I have the key for the ignition and the lock. Can you make a key and program it for me? You're probably going to be money saved by doing that versus going to the dealer. It's easier to get the key while you have the key than when you don't have the key. Now, some keys, like Mercedes, are available only at the dealer. And worse than that, some keys for Mercedes aren't even available. They're no longer in production. Keep that in mind. Don't lose your keys. And if you can, consider having a spare made while you still have it. Now, here's a caution for all of you about Wasp Spray. Those cans of Wasp Spray, you can get them at the dollar store. You get them in lots of places. Well, it's toxic. It's so toxic that it kills wasps and bees instantly. Right? Now, make sure that if someone attacks you and you have one of these in your car, that you don't spray the attacker in the eyes. Don't do that. Because that can really cause them impaired vision. It could actually blind them. So if your life is threatened and you happen to have a can of Wasp Spray that you just bought because you're coming back from the dollar store and you just spray it, be careful. Don't spray it in the person's eyes because you can really hurt them. Coffee. If you drink it, you can still get coffee in steel cans. Yeah, I'm talking about not plastic, not cardboard with aluminum lining, steel cans. There's a brand called Canes, C-A-I-N-S, Canes brand. It's available at Sam's Club. And it will last a long time. Some people say it doesn't last very long. I think they're mistaken. I think it lasts years. At least it does for us. So we keep it cool and dry in a stable temperature, where it doesn't get hot and cold and hot and cold. And it lasts years. So if you like coffee and if you think that's something that you'd like to continue having and you want to ensure that your supply doesn't get interrupted, consider getting some. And when I need to round out the Chinese factory outlet $35 minimum purchase, like let's say I can actually put together an order that's almost $35 of things that we would like to buy, things that we need, and I need to just bump it up a couple more dollars, maybe 5, 6, 7. Coffee is a way to do that. Now, they don't have it in the steel cans. They might have canes, but the place to get canes is Sam's Club, I think. At least that's what it looks like to me in terms of price. But sometimes just throw in a can of, a big can, like a number 10 can of coffee, 30-something ounces, and that can round up your purchase, and you can get free shipping. Rainwater Collection. A lot of preparedness-minded people have been talking about rainwater as a natural supply of water for your home. I suggest you be very, very careful using rainwater. And the reason for that is your roof, if it's like a typical roof that's a composition roof and it has 3-tab or architectural shingles, it has those little granules of colored stones, little tiny stones that are colored like white, black, green, red, brown, tan, whatever color they might be, or variegated shade of colors. Well, that's a perfect trap for airborne particles to get stuck on because it's a rough surface. Bird poop, hair is flying through, spider webs, insect poop. Your roof is full of it. So if you collect rainwater for drinking purposes, keep in mind that even radioactivity is on your roof. All kinds of chemicals, chem sprays, chemtrails, jet fuel, whatever detonations the military has done, stuff from the fires, particles from the fires in the West Coast. It's on your roof. So be really careful. And if you're going to consider drinking that, I would make sure that I waited till it's settled for days, undisturbed, and then I would siphon off from the top of it, near the top of it, not the very top, but several inches down, and then I'd filter it through a ProPure type water filtration system. Battery-powered radios. It seems to be that people are concerned about communication, and we've got to have a radio. Well, do you have one in your house? I'm pretty sure you do. Like an AM or FM, table radio, one near the bed. People used to actually use those as alarm clocks. Well, they work fine if you have an inverter if the grid goes down. But what about if the grid does go down? Do you have a radio that's battery powered? And the answer is you probably do. And where is it? It's in your car. Okay? It's hooked up to a battery that's probably okay. So 12-volt car radio with a 12-volt battery that's already installed in your car. It's ready to go. Now, you'll notice that car radios really work well. They have great selectivity and great sensitivity. So a car radio is sensitive and it can pick up weaker signals than a home table radio can. Because number one, it's outside. The signal's not attenuated by being inside the house. Car's outside. Unless it's in the garage, right? But that car radio has an external antenna. Now, sometimes they used to be like a 30.5-inch mast antenna, on the right front fender. That's the way they used to do it. Then they put them in the glass, the windshield glass. Sometimes it's in the rear window, like in a Mercedes. Sometimes it's in the front window, like in a domestically produced automobile or truck. Some trucks have the mast antennas. Those car radios are way better, in my opinion, in terms of performance than a house radio. They can select frequencies more precisely and reject other frequencies more precisely than a house radio can, tabletop. They're more sensitive, they can pick up weaker signals, and they can reject the ones that you don't want through the tuning mechanism. So you've already got the radio. Now, in the studio, I have a home stereo. I probably paid, $20, $30, $40 for it years ago used. And it happens to be a Panasonic, Technics by Panasonic. The one in the studio is an SA-80. The one in the rest of the house is an SA-200. I see we have a call, and Jason's answering the call. Jason, thank you for engineering today. Just me, and tips from the book. So, it rained for almost 2 months here, summer of 2020. And it was so wet that we couldn't walk outside the house without walking in, a couple inches of water. It's every day or every other day, nonstop rain. Trees were soggy, they're falling over, etc. You have water boots? You might want to consider them. And, normally you don't think about that, but I couldn't wear my leather boots. I'd ruin them because of the amount of rain. Kyle, welcome.
Hey, I had just a quick one, Vince. I agree. Yeah. We've had it around here, not nearly that bad, but you might want to invest in some of those flippers as well. I'm just teasing.
Anyway, I wasn't sure if you're talking about flip flops, and I gotta tell you, I can't believe, I didn't know if you meant flip flops or swimming flippers, and you meant swimming flippers. But I see people wearing these flip flops. It's just insane to me. I mean, people, using chemicals and, it's nuts. They're out there in shorts and flip flops, and they're not protecting their feet, doing work where they could drop a hammer on their foot. I mean, it's nuts. Absolutely. But that's what people do.
I was going to put a little bit of an exclamation point on your battery chargers. It's so funny how you and I think so much alike. I have had a Century battery charger that is like amazing with a 200 amp boost on it, and it goes all the way down to 6 amps. And, anyway, I've had that for probably 40 years. Still excellent, heavy, but boy, is it well made. And then I own 2 of the Schumacher, the 610 with a 50 amp boost, little battery chargers that one I had for probably 25 years, and it finally died. And so I was really looking, and I found one on Craigslist that I paid $40 for because it was so hard to find them. And then of all things, the next week I found one at a garage sale for $10. So I snagged both of them, and now I got a backup. But I just absolutely love that little Schumacher because they're lightweight. They do everything you need to do, and they last virtually forever.
Yeah, and we have, I bought a pile, literally a pile of Schumacher battery chargers. And these were ones that I guess someone was repairing them and gave up. And there's probably like 10 or 15 of them in this pile. And I paid $30 for the whole darn pile. And I've been cannibalizing them and, making a few out of a bunch. And one of the things that I found with this particular 6 amp style is it has like a computer, little tiny computer video card, cooling fan. And that's what they use to, it's like this. Battery chargers produce heat. Now you can either have a big heat sink and a lot of vents and a big box to put it in, or you can have a small plastic box with some small vents and a fan to pull air through it. Well, Schumacher decided to use this small fan. And when I say small fan, I'm talking about a large postage stamp size. It's square, but maybe 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Maybe a little bit bigger, but not much, less than 2 by 2. Anyway, those darn things stop running. So what I do is I take a piece of wire, a small wire, and I dip it in automatic transmission fluid, and I put 1 drop I peel the label off the cover of the bearing. It's got a bronze bearing. and I put 1 drop of oil on the fan motor shaft that spins. And it'll work for like another week. And then I do it again and again, and that keeps that thing from quitting. If it overheats, it, can just self-destruct. So that's what I do with the Schumachers.
Yeah, I had the 150 amp boost. I must have had a diode or something along that line pop, because I tried to use it. Like I said, I had it for probably 25 years, but I tried it one time and it sort of like something shorted out inside of it, and it just went to toast. But I've never had that ever happen before, and I must have used it literally. I'll bet I've used it at least 100 to 150 times over that 25 years. But finding 2 of them for $50 tickled me to death. I'm elated with them.
Okay, well, it's something that I did. I went to eBay years ago, and I bought a lot, LOT, of full bridge rectifiers. And I'm looking it up right now. I think I paid maybe $1 a piece, got 10 of them, and I believe they're 50 amps at least each. And these are square with 4 terminals. And you can attach them to a heat sink, and you can use those as the diodes. And you can use it as a half wave or a full wave bridge rectifier. Works great. And maybe in a future broadcast, I'll talk a little bit about that. Kyle, I'm looking forward to our broadcast on Friday. You and David.
Me
ought to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it ought to be a lot of laughs.
George, feel free to join us. Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you. Thank you.